Hello and welcome back to the Grapple Theory podcast. Thanks once again for joining us today. My name's Jamie, I'm your host, and of course, we're joined by a very special guest today. Today, we're celebrating the end of Women's History Month with our first podcast-to-podcast style interview. We're joined by an American podcaster who knows a huge amount about the Brit Rest scene, which is fantastic. She's going to be talking to us all about her thoughts on the scene, the rising stars you need to be watching out for, the sort of pillars of independent wrestling, both here and over in America, and also about what it was about Brit Rest that sort of brought her into the scene. So I'm delighted to welcome our guest for today's show. She is the host of the A Wrestling Gal podcast. She also works on the Gorecast with Mickie James. She works at Bell to Bells. She works so many other places. We're going to be talking about all of that, about her friendship with Mickie, about loads more to do with women's wrestling, the state of women's wrestling, and where it's heading as well to celebrate Women's History Month. I'm pleased to welcome Ella J to the podcast. Ella, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Of course, I don't get to talk about, I feel like, the UK scene a lot. I mean, I watch or follow a lot of it, but I never really get to, talk about it outside of, me talking to the wrestlers themselves.
Yeah, how did that come about as a wrestling fan in general? When did you first become aware of the British scene?
That's actually how I started, getting into, my podcasting and, independent wrestling was because of the Brit scene, so.
Really? Not the American scene?
No, and we'll explain that in here.
So go on, how does that all come about then? How does that start?
Because I found Pro Wrestling Eve's Super Showdown because I did not want to watch Super Showdown. And then that's how we'll talk about it, but yeah.
You mentioned Super Showdown, and so you come across that show. And what are your initial thoughts then, watching that show?
Yeah, so I found Super Showdown on Twitter because WWE was running Super Showdown in Saudi Arabia, and I was like, I don't really want to watch this. And then I just randomly come across, everyone's talking about an alternative to that on Twitter with Pro Wrestling Eve, and I had never heard of it up until that point. And so I'm like, I'm going to check this out because it's an all-women's promotion. I don't watch a lot of that. I had never been one to really, I knew what independent wrestling was, but I was so, I think, closed-minded to it because I've grown up with WWE and Impact Wrestling and the bigger companies all my life. Yeah. And so I'm like, I'm going to check this out because I see a lot of people hyping this up. And then the first match, ironically, I saw in there was Jamie Hayter and Britt Baker. And so that is, again, kind of come full circle. They're working with each other now in AEW. But I was really captivated by it. I'm like, this is actually really cool. I've never seen anything like it. And then a Medusa Complex was on there going against Wrestle Friends and Hungry Hippos. What is this thing? And then there was Viper and Kaylee Ray. So there was a good mix of comedy and entertainment with really cool wrestling too. And I never watched an independent promotion like that. And so I was really captivated by Pro Wrestling Eve, by all these mix of different characters and blending of styles. And I'm like, this is a great alternative to Super Showdown.
Yeah, Eve put on a great show. Do you get to watch many of their other shows as well now? Because obviously they stream them all and stuff like that. Do you consistently watch them?
I will say sometimes it's hard because here it's maybe 2 or 3 p.m. depending what time, and so I'm at work, so I don't get to watch a lot of them live, or I have a podcast or anything, so I'll watch a lot of them after the fact. But when I do get to watch them live, I love it. Even just most recently, we had 2 shows, a Brawl at the Brewery and Women Behaving Badly. I got to watch one of them, but I still have to catch up on everything. I've seen the results. Luckily, Twitter's a thing to where you can watch clips and check up on stuff if you miss stuff. So yeah, I just because of time differences, I don't get to watch all of them live, unfortunately.
No, that's fair enough. That makes sense. But that was your first sort of real taste of not just British wrestling, but also indie wrestling as well.
Yes, literally. When I say I had been so close-minded to independent wrestling, up until that point, I don't know why, because I had a bunch of friends who were into it, and I had kind of dabbled a little bit into it, with Ring of Honor and a lot of the independent people coming in through there. But the real true first taste of independent wrestling was the British scene, the UK scene with Pro Wrestling Eve.
That's definitely crazy. That's really crazy. I mean, in terms of differences that you see then in terms of British independent wrestling and American independent wrestling, are there a lot of differences in terms of, I guess, the vibe and things like that?
That's a good question. And like I've asked somebody this before too. Like would you say that there's like a difference between like British and like American
Mm,
style of wrestling? It might have I can't remember who it was cuz they had worked for both. Maybe it was I don't know. But it might have been like it might have been Emily Hayden because there's this one
mm,
promotion she works for that's like British style, like that blends like American British style wrestling. And I
mm,
was like, what does that mean? Um I don't know. I honestly I don't know. I feel like there's a good mix of both. I don't know how to explain it.
mm,
Like for me, definitely like when you think of Japan, you think of like strong style. When you think of like the UK, I feel like it's still very similar to
mm,
the US with vibes and stuff. I will say though, I think the UK has given a great spotlight to women's wrestling too. Not
mm,
to say that the US hasn't because they definitely have, but it's definitely cool to see the UK like definitely giving more women opportunities. And I feel like also the UK scene is technically smaller.
mm.
So
Yeah.
while the US is, I mean, the UK is a whole country itself
Mm,
too, but the US is just bigger geographically.
mm,
And so I feel like there's all like little niches of areas as to where the UK you see a lot of people of the same people like traveling like
mm.
all around, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It does. I was going to ask about that because obviously, like, there are plenty of like US states that are just bigger than the UK in general. So does it feel like that in America, where like the indie scene is more like state to state rather than a nation's independent wrestling scene?
I will say definitely. Obviously, there's people that blend
Mm,
together and there's people who travel about, but there's definitely like you definitely know the New England scene. You definitely know the Texas girls.
mm,
You know the New York, Philly, Jersey people. You know like the Midwest. There's Florida. There's California.
mm,
You definitely like even like when I think of like the New England scene, I think of a certain group of people. When I think of Texas, I think of a certain group of people. Same with California, Florida, the Midwest, like all of that, like New York there's definitely groups and of course it sometimes interweaves itself because
mm.
people travel and stuff but there's definitely like niche or concentrated pockets of the US geographically where you there's a certain like scene of
Yeah.
common talents there.
Yeah, and I guess I mean it'd be interesting to get your view in it as an American viewer. That sort of makes the British scene, I think, a little more accessible in terms of the fact that you can watch like a show and see so many of the people you'd see on just another Brit Rest show. Whereas in America, you'd probably have to watch 4 or 5 different shows to maybe see like your 5 or 6 top favorites.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of the UK scene, and even I mean that interweaves with Ireland and
Mm,
Scotland too as well, because it's all very closely connected. I feel like you can turn on something and you'll see like different people, like you'll see everybody like across like many different shows, if that makes sense.
mm,
It's definitely cool though to see it expanding. Although I will say I have seen a lot of the same faces over the last 2 years. Maybe that's just because I know a lot of them personally.
mm.
I know there's definitely some on their way up, but definitely it's cool to see like the UK and Ireland, Scotland, like just being everywhere and so accessible for
Mm,
them.
for sure, for sure. So, who would be like, if I were to ask you for your ones in terms of Brit Rest, like ones to watch for, again, any like American, Canadian, maybe like even Australian viewers that we've got, who would be the stars of Brit Rest that you'd be like, these are the people you should be checking out?
That's not signed, I take it.
No, yeah, not signed. Yeah, yeah, just indie
Okay.
wise.
Somebody who I don't know, who I'm shocked like has not gotten signed is Zoe Lucas. Like
Mm,
honestly, I mean Rev Pro's Queen of the Ring last year. She's a former Rev Pro undisputed British champion, former like she's been working with Shimmer in a lot of that. She's recently started a tag team with Mariah May
mm,
too, the Dream Dolls. I don't know how she has not gotten scooped up at
yeah,
all.
for
So
sure. She's
definitely
great.
her work has evolved as she's now the beauty wrestler.
Mm,
She's definitely I feel like she's at the top of or should be at the top of the scene right now too.
mm,
But other like I mean Mariah May's been very much killing it too.
mm,
One girl whose shirt I'm wearing right now is unfortunately just gotten injured is Hannah Taylor, who I love and adore so much, and she had some cool opportunities coming up, but
mm.
obviously now, unfortunately, she's going to be on the shelf for a bit. There's also, are we counting like Scotland and
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
Ireland
Yeah,
as
yeah, yeah,
well?
for sure.
Okay, definitely two. My girl got a shout out Ashley Vega. My
Mm,
girl, we bond over our love for the Divas era. She's been training since she was like 15 years
mm,
old. So she's definitely worked her way through everything and grown up wrestling, and she's definitely expanding her repertoire. That's definitely one. And one more. Oh my gosh. I feel like somebody who is just returned but has been like killing it is Alex Windsor.
yes.
She's already vied for like the Shimmer Championship. Obviously, like she just wrestled for the Eve International
Mm,
Championship. She's the queen of the Carnival champ.
yeah.
She's also what Rev
She's
Pro
Rev Pro champ as well. Yeah,
undisputed
yeah. She's
British
killing it.
champion right now. Yeah, Alex Windsor since returning has been like dominating,
Oh,
and
it's
it's
mental,
such
right? It's
an
mental.
and yeah, and I wasn't one who knew of her prior to her return because
Mm.
this was after I found like the British scene and all of that. But I'm just absolutely like blown away from what she's been doing.
Mm. But even then, that's the thing. Like again, you say you didn't know of her before then, but obviously she made a return at Eve. I think it was at Wrestle Queendom, and she'd been
Yes.
out 4 years before that. And if like even as someone who maybe didn't know her, like if you'd said watch that wrestler and you tell them they've been out for 4 years, you wouldn't know it because she just went back into it so smoothly.
I know, and again, I would have never even thought that she's been, like, running wild and been everywhere now within the UK scene, and it's really cool. It's been, what, just over 6 months
Mm.
now since she's returned. She hasn't lost a beat, it seems.
Yeah, she's doing fantastic. I mean, all the ones you mentioned there are doing fantastic. Zoe Lucas, like almost like a veteran, really. She's been like at it so long, and she's always been like in and around the top.
Mhm.
And it's been, yeah, like you say, it's crazy that she's never got signed or got like that major push that would really elevate her. But she does a fantastic job, and all the ones you mentioned, Mariah May up and coming as well. She's coming over to the US as well, I believe, isn't she? Well, she just came there. She's going back
I
as
will be
well.
seeing her at New Texas Pro in Dallas, so that's gonna be fun.
Amazing, yeah, she's fantastic. I mean, she's just brilliant. Like the character and her in-ring work as well is absolutely fantastic. You'll have a good time seeing her for sure.
I'm so excited. I've been friends with her for a few years since like before she started wrestling,
Mm,
and it's so cool to see her blossom. And now, I mean, just randomly, she's back in the states here like this weekend or next weekend,
mm.
going flying back to the UK and then coming back in a few weeks again
The
for Dallas.
graft is real. I tell you what, like something that I sort of knew about but didn't really consider until we started like this channel is that the graft is so real. Like it's
Mhm,
crazy the amount of travel like these guys do. You know, and
mhm.
it's absolutely mental. It's absolutely mental. But yeah, with all those great talent again being pushed in the states, being pushed over here, I want to know in terms of like crossing over, like coming over, like Mariah May is doing things like that. I mean, do you see a wrestler as sort of bigger, almost like bands? You know, like bands for to break globally. That's a big deal for a band. Do you see it as the same as for a wrestler? Do you think it's the same feeling to be able to break, say, the States, or for an American wrestler to come over here and thrive, like we've seen with Hyun and Giselle Shaw as well initially, before obviously getting signed for Impact?
I think it definitely gets a lot of eyes on stuff. So, like, I feel like perhaps maybe Jamie Hayter is a good example. I mean,
Mm,
Jamie, before she got signed to AEW, I mean, she was working with Japan in a
mm,
while, but again, not everybody watches Japan. I mean, I started watching her a through Pro Wrestling Eve, and
mm,
then I followed her work to Japan, and then now, but I feel like a lot of people are getting their first introduction to Jamie Hayter since she came to the States and on AEW, maybe because it's just All Elite Wrestling.
mm,
But definitely, too, I feel like it's cool that the US, again, sometimes we're all closed minded and don't explore out of our own bubble. I definitely used to be like that. So I think it's definitely great that they're getting eyes if somebody from overseas travels to the United States here
mm,
to get a lot of eyes on them and maybe matchups and promotions that they wouldn't have gotten to work with otherwise. Like you said, conversely, too, like we've had Hyon traveled to the
mm.
UK. Becca was just there a few
Yeah.
months ago for Pro Wrestling Eve. I know Ava Everett is currently in like around Germany and
Mm.
Europe right
Yeah, she's coming
now.
over as well. Yeah.
Madison Miles was at Wrestle Queendom 4 last year too as well. The Hex just came over, Max the Impaler. I feel like it works too when they're able to
Mm,
cross over in two different worlds because I feel like the UK scene has a whole different crop of talent than like the US one, and to see those like blend together, I think is just beneficial for both sides.
for sure, for sure. And obviously, we're having you on the show here. Obviously, pre-recorded, but this is going out. It's the end of Women's History Month, and I really want to pick your brain in terms of, I guess, the sort of the state of women's wrestling at the minute, because I think everyone's thriving. I think Brit Rest, I say it, we've said it to a few guests as well. The Brit Rest scene over here, if you take just the women's scene, like I'd put that up against any other division in the world, like as one of the best in terms of both talent and depth as well. So I want to pick your brain in terms of where do you see women's wrestling at the minute? Because you get people on social media as well who are still, those sort of people that are a bit naysayers about women's wrestling and what it should be and what it is at the moment. Do you think that women's wrestling, in terms of both the level of coverage it gets and the quality of wrestling and people being more accepting of it, has improved over the last few years?
I think it varies company to
Mm,
company, but overall, definitely women have been given more time to be able to execute those quality matches. I will say it's definitely cool to see more cards now with more than just one women's match on the card.
mm,
Obviously, if we're excluding all women's shows,
yeah.
because that's the whole thing. But on more like tenfold pay-per-views or like cards that are mainly male dominated, women have been getting like two or three matches. So it's definitely good to see. I think in anything though, it's definitely going to take more and more time to improve. We've definitely improved and evolved a lot over even the last few years, and that's
Mm,
definitely something that I covered even in one of my PWI articles last year, in talking. I think it was Deanna Perrazzo who like said it best. I mean, we've come so far, but it's like reaching that next level, and I feel like the next step to elevate it even more is getting more women in
mm,
like high power situations, or like more authority figures, like with producers or writers or like on-screen characters, general managers, stuff like that. I feel like the next step too is definitely having more women's voices and perspectives
mm,
in those decision making, or like authority figures too as well, that are booking the show, because then maybe we will get, I say we, I'm not a wrestler. Maybe the women will get even more time to properly showcase themselves, and maybe things will be handled differently with how a storyline is written
mm.
out, because I don't know how to explain it, but we've come far, but there's always still more to improve upon, definitely, I think, in anything.
For sure. And you mentioned sort of company to company. There are still promotions over here that have like one women's match on a card or no
Yeah.
women's matches on a card. And that's still mind blowing to me. Like, it's baffling because, if anything, and I'll say this for any of like our listeners who are watching, I think the male wrestling over here is fantastic, but I'd say the women's is stronger at the moment. And so to have like no women on your card just seems incredible to me. Do you think like do you think there is still a stigma around women's wrestling, despite the fact that we've come so far and so much has improved and the quality is very clearly there? Do you think that in maybe even if it's just a minority of the minds, do you think there's still a stigma about women's wrestling?
Definitely too. I mean, a perfect example of that is, I mean, Mickie James. The reason she ran in Power is somebody who is in a high profile backstage producer role was telling her that women's wrestling doesn't draw, and
Mm,
essentially that it kind of doesn't matter. And so, I mean, she went to go prove otherwise. And I mean, that's just saying that if somebody in WWE is thinking that,
mm,
who's like very high up in the social ladder or whatever, there's definitely going to be other people who think the same way as well. I think it's again going back to like a real life thing. It's like that equality that we're pushing towards,
mm,
whether that's in pay rates, how women are treated, like the opportunities available to them. I think that translates across not only wrestling but in general as
mm,
well. I feel like in general there's always been this stigma against women, and we're trying to change that and work towards that equality of having things 50-50, and it's always a struggle. I think some people are still in that mindset of the patriarchy. I've never sounded off like this, but it's true. There's definitely still some stigma around it, and some people who are
mm,
thinking that like women don't belong, or that we're somehow invading their space or something. That this has been this male dominated
mm,
industry for centuries, and it should continue that way. Blah blah blah, or that women are just novelty acts,
mm.
pretty much at best, or afterthoughts. And so it's definitely going to take a lot more work to change that.
Yeah, and you talk about that sort of, I guess, still almost lack of equality in wrestling in terms of maybe how it's perceived. I mean, as someone who is a wrestling fan in yourself and also like a podcaster, is that something that you've experienced yourself? Is it something that maybe like other wrestling fans are like, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Like you get in things like soccer or other sports where female fans seem to be perceived as not knowing as much as male fans because it's a traditionally male-dominated industry. Do you get any of that, or have you had any of that?
As a female podcaster, there definitely have been a few instances where I've felt like I had to prove that I was a true wrestling fan and kind of prove my knowledge that I was actually a fan of this considered male dominated industry. Oh man, there's definitely a few instances where people will bring up certain information, like I don't already know it, or talk about like a certain moment in wrestling, a certain year, a certain match, and kind of quiz me on it and ask like if I know it. But I feel like not in anything you do, not everybody's going to know absolutely everything, and people have to remember that I personally did not start watching wrestling until 2009, so my fandom live watching has only been the past 13 years. Of course, I've gone back and watched a lot of stuff, but you have to remember too, in any sport, there is decades upon decades of history to remember and catch up on. And that's just in the US alone. There's the whole world too spectrum that wrestling has been a part of. And so for me, it's definitely taken some time in the last couple of years to get myself caught up to an extent of things from the past. But definitely there's been people who have quizzed me or basically scrutinized me. I've talked about this too, and I mean in an interview with Denise Salcedo that I did, especially I feel like as a female, there's more pressure to have all your information correct, or we're more scrutinized for if we get something wrong, like if we make a little error or we don't know something or we're misinformed. I feel like females are a lot more scrutinized and criticized than as they would be to their male counterparts in pro wrestling. So why? I don't know. Maybe it's because this has been a male dominated industry and some people are still under the false pretenses that females can't be pro wrestling fans. And if they are, they're only in it for the sex appeal or whatever. I've definitely encountered that people saying that I only enjoy wrestling because of the attractiveness of some of the competitors, whatever. But I think in any sport you do, if you're a female fan or a soccer fan or whatever sport, basketball even, I feel like people are going to say that, oh, you're only watching it because of men are attractive, blah, 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 or whoever is competing in it. There's definitely a stigma surrounding the actual knowledge and seriousness and people questioning if we're actually interested in this, or are we just only saying we are because it's cool or it's edgy or I don't know what. But I definitely have experienced that, and I definitely feel like as a female podcaster or host, there's definitely more eyes on us, watching us, waiting for us to make a mistake. And people will jump on it right away, more so than they would perhaps for our male counterparts. But that pretty much sums it up, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously, like, if people want to go and listen to the interviews you've done, we encourage them to do that here as well. But from the people you've interviewed, from the wrestlers you've interviewed, do you get that sense as well that that maybe that changes are happening, whether it be, slowly in some places or quicker some other places? Do you sense that there's sort of that more positivity from the wrestlers themselves, that things are starting to move forward?
I think it depends like where you are, because some places are better than
Mm,
others. Some promotions are better at showcasing women's wrestling than others, or building that or closing that gap
mm,
towards equality. And so like I said, I think it depends. But I have heard a lot of people who have like been on like Pro Wrestling Eve is a great example though, that they've showcased women's wrestling for over like 10 years.
mm.
But say somebody who hasn't worked with an all women's promotion or works with a promotion that doesn't showcase it as much, I feel like that's a different case. So I feel like it kind of depends where you go, because every place is different.
Yeah, sure, sure. And getting into something sort of, I guess, more negative, and we won't linger on it for too long. But obviously, the last couple of years with COVID has been terrible, and obviously, the summer of 2020 we saw Speaking Out, and that was even more heartbreaking than anything that COVID could bring in terms of the lack of wrestling, because hearing all these stories come out was awful. It was heartbreaking. As someone who is both a fan of America, the American scene and the British scene, I mean, because obviously I don't know, I can only go based on what I see on social media, but how was it over in America in terms of speaking out, like the impact it had? Because I know here in Brit Rest, it really hit hard. Like it hit the scene hugely. Like, did it have that same impact over there?
Definitely too, and that was definitely a point in time where I took a break from podcasting. I want to say for like almost 2 months because a part of me, and again, we don't anyone who's like not a wrestler or not like heavily involved, like really truly we think we know, but I feel like we truly, that was definitely a wow moment where we don't know everything.
Yeah.
And so that for me was a real shock, like eye-opening moment that I kind of felt betrayed by pro wrestling. And I tweeted it out before where I was kind of doubting, like, is this really like an industry that I want to be in? It was definitely like a good month or two period where I paused my podcast and like all content. And I was like reevaluating everything because I felt so distraught. And especially because I knew some people, I was close to some people who had come out during that time and had shared their stories. And I was like, holy shit. I'm sorry. I can't swear.
No, you can swear. No, that's fine. Everything's fine here. Yeah.
But I was honestly like, holy shit. And because like I had an instance where somebody who was outed was mentioned on one of my podcasts, and I was like, oh my God, like I can't even, like we were just talking about this a few weeks ago, and now it's out there. And it was definitely very disheartening, but at the same time, I'm glad that people came forward. And even still, I mean, you can't put a timestamp on when somebody feels comfortable with sharing their story, especially with something like that, because everybody has their own healing journeys. But it was definitely very shocking and disheartening at the same time. But I feel like it definitely brought awareness and definitely opened a lot of people's eyes to things, and that people need to be held accountable, especially in scenarios like that, varying to the degree of severity. People need to be held accountable. And I will say it's disheartening, but I am glad that people have come out and shared their stories, especially too if it's something that they've been holding on to for a long time. I feel like it opened a lot of eyes to the Brit scene, but also people then shared their stories over here in America and like all across the world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. No, exactly. And sort of that, I think that was a sort of mutual feeling over here as well. The fact that it almost like that betrayal, like the fact that these people that like we've supported, like, and not known that they could do these horrible things, like you just feel heartbroken by it. And again, we spoke to wrestlers in sending stuff, because when we first set up, we did like a batch of interviews, so we'd had stuff to go before we launched. Obviously, because like you understand, working shoot jobs and stuff, you've got to work around that. And a few people and a few promoters we spoke to since then were like, talking about wanting to come back and talking about whether they should come back, or whether they felt it was right to, and thought like it was a lot of the mindset of, we're not going to let these horrible people take away the thing we love, so we're going to keep going, sort of thing, which is fantastic, and that's great to see. Was it the same for you? Did you have a sort of like, because you mentioned taking that break, did you have a feeling of like, do I want to continue this, like, or how tough a decision was that to make to sort of start doing it again?
Yeah, it definitely was. For me, I was like, do I even want to do this? Or I thought, because I mean, at that point though, I literally had like 15 episodes of my podcast like in the queue waiting to be released at that point, that I was holding on to for 2 months. So even if like I didn't come back after that, I still wanted to put up my content that I had already pre-recorded, and then I don't know. But yeah, definitely I was at a point where I was like, do I just pause doing this? Do I even want to? Like I felt just so betrayed by this thing that I'd been a fan of for like over a decade at that point. But then I realized though too that my platform is like about sharing people's stories and their insights and all of that. And I didn't want to take that away, because for me too, I love learning too about people's stories and their insights in and outside of the ring too, and connecting with people. And so I don't really know how I came to the decision to continue forward. I just feel like it was something that I've been passionate about and I had been really loving, that I guess I just had to be more weary and not as naive, I guess, going back into it
Yeah.
for me. And I didn't want to lose that connection with people, with genuine people. And so for me, I think that's why I continued, because I love connecting with people in this industry, but also it's just we can't always forget, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It makes total sense. And I appreciate you being so open and honest about it. And that's another thing as well, in terms of, I guess we've spoken to as well, like, promoters and wrestlers about, the importance that wrestling changes now. But you're the first sort of like fellow podcaster we've had on. So like, from your perspective as a podcaster, but first and foremost a fan of wrestling, how important is it that, both fans and wrestlers and promoters hold these people accountable for their actions and not let people slip back in, as we've seen like a couple are trying to do?
It's very much important keeping an open line of communication. I mean, again, I don't really know if I would have known like things otherwise if I hadn't been friends with a few of the people who shared their stories during that time. And so I do think that a lot of the companies are putting in those safety protocol guidelines or the protocols in place to have that open line of communication. And I know a while there was like an internal list going around of the people that were being outed, and so that might be something that might be helpful too, so they don't slip under the radar again. And we've seen that over the last few months and over the last year. I feel like it's definitely important to have that open line of communication too. And sometimes people just genuinely don't know. Like there's people that I've definitely only seen on Twitter, like after the fact, to be outed or be like on one of those said lists that I wouldn't have known otherwise. So I think it's keeping that open line of communication, because not everybody knows everything. I certainly don't. I'm sure there's other people that I've seen or that have been like outed during this thing that I just don't know of.
Yeah, no, for sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I mean, you mentioned obviously like come back, and obviously again, I appreciate you being so open and honest about it, and you're doing a fantastic job. Like as a fan of your podcast, like it's great to listen to. And it's fantastic, like listening, and the content you have is great. And if I'm honest, that's sort of like part of our inspiration over here, because the way you talk to wrestlers it's not just your sort of like generic wrestling questions, and you feel like you've got to know that wrestler after listening, which is fantastic. And that's the sort of thing that we want to do over here as well. And that must be nice as well, to be able to have that platform, and especially for yourself now growing and becoming more popular, like to be able to tell those stories, and the stories that, again, you probably wouldn't hear if you didn't ask them.
Yeah, I thank you. I really appreciate that. I try to stay away from the more generic questions, unless it's the scenario where I'm literally their first podcast and I have like nothing to go off of. That's actually happened about like 10 times now, where I've been somebody's first podcast or interview. And then under those scenarios, I'll go a bit more generic, but also taking even if there's nothing to go based off of, there's always like the social media aspect too. Everybody in this day and age kind of has a social media, so even if it is their first scenario, you kind of also want to make it a little bit personalized too, by looking at their Twitter, their Instagram, their Facebook, stuff like that. There's always something. I think only like once there was like nothing to go off of. So, but I mean, yeah, I definitely try to stay away from the more generic questions. Not to say that there's anything wrong with that, but for me personally, if it's a story that or a question I've already know the answer to myself just from listening to other interviews, I don't really ask it, typically.
Unless there's like a follow-up you can make on it or something.
Like you can ask follow-ups. Like there's definitely been instances where I've taken like a nugget of information from those answers and like reshaped it in a way, or had a follow-up question to it. Definitely. I feel like everybody's styles are differently too. That's just my personal, I guess you would call it an interviewing style.
No, but it's great, and that's what I really like. And like that's what we not to say we're trying to mimic you here, but like that's what we try and do as well. We try and get them to open up and tell those stories that you wouldn't normally hear, because I think that's more interesting. It's more interesting to get to know these people as people, not just the people you see in the ring. And I think that's what humanizes them as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I've done a few kayfabe interviews or interviews where you ask about stuff like in character or like about their in-ring work, which is great, but also going behind that curtain, I think, is a great opportunity to learn more, and like humanizes them is a great way of how you put it.
Yeah, and we spoke a bit sort of, again, before we started recording about, like yourself having a shoot job and doing this in your spare time. but it must be really nice to see that you're gaining traction now, you're growing, and I imagine that's something that I know you've spoken about before, sort of you didn't really anticipate when you first started it up. But it must be
No.
nice to know that platform's growing and sort of the stuff you're doing is being seen and making a difference to people.
That's still crazy to hear to me because I'm still like I'm always one who criticizes myself and like always wants to do more and feel like I'm not doing enough. So I really do appreciate that. I'm really trying. Like honestly, I've said this before, but the biggest goal is honestly making wrestling media full
Mm,
time. Like I say, I do a lot, but I've also had to miss out on a lot or pass up on some things because the balance between shoot job and wrestling media is definitely not equal. Like it's crazy like how stacked I have to make my schedule on my said days off is crazy, but I'm trying to make it financially stable, and that's the
mm,
biggest thing I'm struggling with right now because I don't know. But
mm,
luckily I do have some people who kind of, I mean, they're my unofficial mentors, people that I've looked to for advice within
mm.
here who are like making even bigger waves than me, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, we've got you on here. It'd be a shame to have you on the show and not talk about Mickie James, who, again, like you mentioned, mentors and stuff. Someone that, has clearly been a huge help and a friend to you during, like, doing everything. That's got to be a crazy feeling having this wrestler who, like, I'm sure you, like, watched growing up, now essentially be, like, your friend and, like, partner in so many things and get to work so closely with her. I mean, like, in terms of like I just mentioned with your podcast growing, like in terms of that, is that a bit of like a mind blow sort of feeling whenever that
Yeah,
happens?
I don't know why I just started tearing up. But yeah, Mickey was literally the first women I ever saw in pro wrestling
Mm.
in 2009 with the whole Piggy James storyline. That's a whole other
That's
thing.
yeah, that's an interesting way to start.
I know, but I say I've told her this before too. I mean, was it tastefully done? No, but at a time when I was like 12 years old and
Mm,
dealing with my own like body insecurities and stuff like that, I related to her like
mm,
hardcore, and so I always say that I feel like it was meant to be because that was especially during a time where I could literally relate and empathize with her,
mm,
and so that's where it really all started was because this woman like on TV is like getting, not to say that I was like devastatingly bullied for it, but like somebody who's dealing with this real life issue
mm,
translating over into pro wrestling and sports entertainment was just something I'd never seen before. And then like again behind the curtain, learning her story too of what she dealt with growing up, which she's talked about within multiple podcasts before and
mm,
that I've gotten to talk with her about, is just so inspiring, and her love and passion for women's wrestling, and now for her to see and trust in me and my vision to like work with her on GAW TV and their GAWcast and
mm,
like be part of NWA Empower, like that would have not have happened had it not been for her, and I don't think I would be where I am without her.
mm.
It all stems from Jeff Hardy, from finding him, but a big part definitely with all the women's wrestling stuff I do is
Mm.
definitely in part of Mickey, and it's still very surreal that one, she took a chance on me, and now two, I'm friends and working with one of my heroes.
Mm. Yeah, and that's lovely, and that's lovely. It really is. And again, we sort of mainly keep it, indie rest here. But in terms of we're talking about Women's History Month, and we talk about say like, the front runners in terms of getting women that match time that they deserved. And people always bring up like China and Trish and Lita, and rightly so because they all did a fantastic job. But I feel like Mickie really goes under the radar in that respect because I'd still say that Mickie Trish storyline from was it 2005 2006 is like one of the best storylines still that WWE has ever done.
I know, and how she was number 12
Mm.
on that 50 greatest women's list is a
Yeah,
crime. But
absolutely.
I digress. But no, you're absolutely right. Like that was before I started watching, but of
Mm.
course I've gone back. And at that time, like they were feuding for like 6, 7, 8 months,
Mm.
which at that point was like the longest running women's storyline in like WWE history. Obviously, we've seen longer feuds since
Mm.
then, but at that point, that was so like is transcendental, whatever,
Yeah, it was
transcended a lot
groundbreaking.
of
Yeah.
shattered a lot of records
Mm.
and like I feel like prior experiences or representations that WWE was having. And so that really catapulted her. And I mean, even after Trish and Lita left, like Mickey was like I feel like the top girl, like running from like 2007, 2008 before her eventual like leaving 2009, 2010. Like she was always at the top, like winning a lot of like the fan favorite stuff. And obviously she was a 6-time women's champion for a reason during her first run. And so for me, she's very, I mean, it's crazy to say that she's underrated.
But I think she is.
I feel like she is, especially, I mean, we've seen that kind of proven during her second run in WWE, but that's a whole other conversation. But for me, like, she should definitely be in the discussion when we're talking about, like, trailblazers and, like, top women in pro wrestling history. She, for one, who is, she shouldn't even be underrated, but she is.
Yeah, for sure. Now, everyone always asks sort of about like the Mount Rushmore of wrestlers. So I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna flip it. I'm gonna say either American or British, but indie wrestlers. Who do you see as the new, say 3 or 4, the new pillars of indie wrestling?
See, I want to say one person, but she technically just got signed, but she still does do a lot of independent.
I think that's fine. If it's who I'm thinking of, I think that'll be fine.
Masha Slamovich.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that wasn't somebody who I really came up on until about a year and a half. No, it's what, 20? Yeah, about a year and a half ago, actually. Like she, I mean, through Japan and then through her return to the States, it's been freaking wild. And I will say, I was definitely one who went to bat with her for the PWI women's list because I'm like, she has come back to so much buzz and so much experience to where she's in Texas, she's in California, she's in New York, she's everywhere. And now, rightfully so, she signed to Impact Wrestling. I would have to say, it has to be Masha Slamovich. Definitely is one. Oh man. I would say Impact has been scooping up 2 very good people, but honestly though, if we're talking about like the UK, I mean Giselle Shaw, she just got signed.
No, but we can talk about her because she's still the Progress Women's Champion as well. Like she's absolutely killing it, and she's an interesting one as well because we'll get back to sort of like why you'd have her as a pillar, but she's a really interesting one in the fact that it seemed like she was a smaller name when she first came over to BritWrest, and it's BritWrest that's made her the big name, which is crazy.
Yeah. And she was the highest ranked Brit wrestler on, again, the PWI women's list at like number 19. She was, I believe. But honestly, like training in Canada with Lance Storm Academy, traveling to the US and also Britain. It's crazy that she's made a name for herself in British when she's from Canada. But yeah, no, Giselle Shaw, like prior to signing to Impact Wrestling, I would still say even now, I mean, she was basically running the scene, especially during the pandemic. Obviously, the former Rev Pro undisputed British Women's Champion, she's still the Progress Women's Champion. She was very, very central in a lot of things in the UK scene, especially during a time where the UK was not running. They were basically only running televised stuff.
Yeah, the closed
during
tapings,
lockdown, and she was working like all of them. So definitely, I would say Giselle Shaw. Now she's over here in the States on Impact Wrestling.
Yeah, lucky you. Yeah,
I love her,
and you get to watch her at like a normal time for you rather than having to.
That's true. Yeah. That's very true, man. And one more. Oh man. It's tough.
Yeah, I'll put you on the spot a bit. Yeah.
Oh, Alley Catch, duh. Alley Catch is like how she has not gotten signed is absolutely wild to me, but she has, I mean, GCW she's been involved in. She's very heavily, I mean, she goes from like Texas to Florida to like New York City. She's been all around and like has organically grown her own fan base, and even shifting from Alley Cat to Alley Catch, like even through this transition, she has transformed herself so much and people love her, and rightfully so. She's held multiple championships and just has like, she's very fearless too in how she presents herself. And it's very cool to see her mix with intergender, but also women's wrestling as well. So I would definitely say Alley Catch as well.
Yeah, nice. I like that. It's a strong 3 as well. Like that would rival anyone.
Definitely so.
No, I like that. And you mentioned PWI there. That's something that I'd be interested to sort of like, again, pick your brains about. But that's something I've always been a bit skeptical about in terms of, say, like the PWI 500. like in my mind, and I don't know how you feel about this. As someone who sort of like worked on it and knows so much about those wrestlers and women's wrestlers specifically, like it's always been a bit weird to me that you have a 500, but the only women, and that's recently, the only women that can be on it are ones that have had intergender matches.
For me, I've only personally worked on the women's list this last year. I have not worked on the PWI 500. I don't know exactly the reasoning behind it. I feel like maybe because it's been male dominated for so long, the 500 is based on male competition. And so the way that a lot of the women get competition is through intergender matches that would qualify them. And again, that might change because it's still a new thing. Like this was only the second year that the women were featured on the PWI 500. Again, I don't know exactly because I've only worked on the women's list. But that's how I understand it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. That makes sense. And again, like this is me trying to sort of put you in any sort of position, but like again, just as we're talking about sort of like again Women's History Month and sort of like equality for women in wrestling growing, like because I see that as part of it. I see as like you mentioned like a Giselle Shaw or like again over here someone who's had a great year is like Lizzie Evo, but like so to have her and like to say that she wouldn't necessarily, and again it's not because of the list necessarily, but then to be like that she wouldn't be in the top 500 wrestlers in the world, like regardless of gender, seems a bit odd to me. Like I don't understand the distinction between what makes a good year, why gender needs to get involved with that.
Well, yeah, again, I don't know. I don't really have any insight into the 500 list because I just worked on the women's list, but definitely like Lizzie is definitely one who, again, I feel like definitely had like her breakout list last year too. A lot of it though happens within the time, has to happen though within the time frame for it. So I believe the 500 is from July to the end of June. And so maybe in Lizzie's case, her run a lot of during that time, Britain was on lockdown. And so I feel like a lot of her stuff maybe started off towards the latter half of the evaluation period with that when she was allowed to. Because I'm trying to do the math in my head right now. So like Britain came back like what? Like maybe
came back sort of like May, June, but that was lockdown, and then people didn't start coming back to about September, October.
Yeah, and so that would be a case where the evaluation period would end late June. And do you think her kind of big run really started maybe like May, June-ish towards the end of the period? I don't know who's to say she won't be on it this year when the evaluation period ends, but a lot of it has to do with the period, the cutoff to where it is.
Sure. And again, just working on the 150 though, like that must have been great to have that opportunity to really showcase women's wrestling in that regard. Be like, these are the best women's wrestlers in the world.
Yeah, and I mean, I was kind of brought in, and I've said this before, so it's not like new news. I was kind of brought in as like the indie expert. Ironically, it's crazy that now like something that I like didn't really watch before like 3 years ago now is now kind of like not what
your forte, your specialty,
or my forte was what I'm considered. And that, I mean, that's what I was told, and I knew a lot of the insight too with the British scene too, and so. That's why some of the people, I mean, we all have our favorites. You have to remember it's like 7 people working on a list, but there's definitely people that each of us advocated for to be higher, like on the list. And like one for me of those was Masha Slamovich. And one of them was also Giselle Shaw, actually, like explaining the influence that she's had. I mean, a dual champion during a lot of this time and really representing, like she really was the pillar of the UK scene. And so I definitely knew a lot of the independent scene when it came to the PWI Women's 150, which is crazy, like I said, because I was not one who like watched indie wrestling until 3 years ago.
And we've talked about the British scene as well. I mean, you mentioned Eve as well in your fandom there. Do you watch any? Do you get the chance to watch any other British promotions?
Progress I've worked with a few times. I mean, that's very accessible too. A lot of it, though, I don't get to see because it's not like streams. Rev Pro I've been following. Queen of the Carnival. Wrestle Carnival, I should say. Oh my gosh, there's also a Catch Pro Wrestling too is definitely a new one where Lizzie became the inaugural champ. A lot of the time though I have to follow through clips on Twitter because it's not like up, or you can only watch it like if you're at the event itself. But those are definitely a few of the other ones that I like follow too as well.
Yeah, no, Catch are doing fantastic. Well, they're another one that really like pushed the women's division, and that's great to see as well. They really like help elevate it, which is fab.
Yeah. Oh, and TNT Extreme Wrestling. Oh my gosh, like, dude, they had like a deathmatch tournament like
Yeah.
last summer. It was wild.
Yeah, they've got GCW coming over as
really.
Yeah, that's going to be a crazy tie-in. Like that's one we spoke to. I think we spoke to Lee and Martin, who are the new owners of Progress, who just acquired the 50% stake in TNT, and like they were going on about it loads. And I think we spoke to like someone off TNT as well. I can't remember who it was. But like they mentioned that someone like Ali Catch would be great over here for like that mix-up show, like against someone like Alexis Falcon or Lizzie Evo or someone.
Oh my God, yes. Or if Casey's healed by, I don't know how long Casey Owens is out, but that would definitely be one I'd want to see too.
Yeah, that would be intense. That'd be great. Well, I was going to ask you about that sort of in terms of just wrapping up. It'd be a shame to have you here as, again, the indie expert who knows both the American and the UK scene, and like not get you to pick some sort of dream matchups if you had to put like one British competitor against an American competitor.
Okay, so I'll exclude her from this, but like Jamie Hayter has been like my favorite for like forever, but she's signed now, so we'll keep this out of that. Oh, mixing two worlds together, UK and US. Oh my God. Oh, there's so much. I feel like I booked a match when I did a podcast a few months ago where we were talking about building our own card, and now I'm trying to think of like who else. This list is no longer with me. Oh man, I would feel like I would definitely want a tag team match though. Oh my God, but do you count signed people?
It depends. I mean, because like you mentioned the pillars, and we could see it in Impact. We could see Masha versus Giselle, like at any moment, and like.
Would you say the Inspiration though? I don't know.
No, I suppose they are signed with WWE before. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, because like I would say like the Inspiration and like Wrestle Friends, or like the Inspiration and the Dream Dolls, because I think that would be hilarious.
Oh, that would be great, actually. Yeah, I'll let you have that because you said that, because the Dream Dolls against the Inspiration would just be amazing.
I would love that so much, honestly.
You know, I appreciate I put you on the spot there with sort of dream matchups, but I really appreciate you taking the time to chat to me. We're going to end with a segment that we do with a few wrestlers as well, but I think it applies well here, and it's called The Matches That Shaped My Life. So I'm just going to throw out some sort of match scenarios, and you let me know what comes to mind. Okay, so the first one is... I just lost it. Here we go. The first match I remember watching.
Jeff Hardy versus CM Punk. Loser leaves town. It was a Hell in a Cell steel cage match in summer of 2009.
Amazing. And leading on from that, because it could be this match, but it might be something else, it was the match that made me fall in love with wrestling.
That would be the same match that I first ever saw, was Jeff Hardy and Punk.
You've spoken about Jeff a lot. It's obvious that like Jeff means a lot to you, and like the reason you love wrestling. Like, what was it about that match and about him, like that sort of drew you in so much?
You know, it's crazy too, because that was like his literal last match in WWE up until that point. And so I don't know, like there was this, like he was a guy with cool face paint, and like he was just very high flying and like, I mean, charismatic, but also when he was like giving his goodbye speech, the crowd was just very much invested with him. Like I was like very hooked on him. Like where are you going? And like, I don't know what's going on. And then following his work though after that through like YouTube, and then him popping up on TNA like a few months later in January, like he just, I don't know, he's very like fearless and like very, I mean, he really is the charismatic enigma, just like larger than life, and like he's just very entertaining, I feel like. Yeah,
absolutely. He's always been one of the more entertaining ones, like in terms of just like you say, pure charisma. Like he's just got it, he gets it. Amazing. The next one is like the first live event I went to.
It was a holiday tour in the Christmas, around like 2 days after Christmas in 2009. And one of my first memories, it was a 6-man tag match between DX was teaming with Kofi against Legacy, so Randy, Cody, and Ted. And I was 12 years old at my first live event. They pantsed Randy Orton and like Cody Rhodes. And so in my first live event, I got to see their bare buttocks. I'm like, what is this? And also there was like John Cena and Sheamus like in like for the WWE Championship, and there was a lot going on there. But I will never forget DX pantsing Legacy.
I mean, that's a tough thing to forget, I imagine. Like to just get out your mind in general.
Mm-hmm.
The next one, this is a tough one. I'm going to put you on the spot again here because it's my favorite wrestler.
Oh, okay. Jeff is my third favorite wrestler.
Oh, is he?
Actually, yeah.
Oh.
We already talked about one of the other ones, Mickie James, but all time for me, it's Shawn Michaels.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I am praying and hoping I finally get to see Shawn again in Dallas. But yeah, so Shawn also, I started watching on his last leg of his like WWE career, basically like the last 6 months of his career. But like DX, especially during that time where I was like struggling, like I was in a dark place. I was in middle school. It was not a good time. DX definitely like gave me a lot of comedy and like a lot of escape, but also like his in-ring work, like as the Heartbreak Kid, like very resilient, entertaining, like great in-ring work all around for me. Like, and then I've gone back and watched a lot of his old stuff, and it just brings me like so much joy. And like you can see the heart he has and like his selling abilities, the emotion he can evoke out of people. It's always been Shawn, Mickie, Jeff. I'm sorry to give an order, but it's always been those three for me is all time.
No, that's great. That's great. That's fantastic. And again, like away from these questions for a minute, because again, we normally talk, like indie wrestling here. But I want to, I'm just intrigued that you say that because obviously, like so many favorites. I think it would be for myself as well. Like so many of like my favorites from like WWE would be these people who are like not there anymore, or who people like are in their 40s now or 50s. Like, how do you feel about the way WWE goes about like trying to make new stars, I guess, because it seems like they're still a little too reliant on those old stars.
I mean, for me personally, I've been very fortunate. Like, I got to have Kurt Angle come back to, like, literally all of my top 5 favorite people have come back. Like, even John Morrison, too. Like, Shawn came back briefly in 2018. He's still there in, like, NXT. Mickey came back. Jeff came back. Kurt Angle came back. Edge came back. John Morrison. I feel like I've just been very lucky. But I mean, if they weren't my favorites, I feel like it depends too, like who you are, because obviously Mickey was not booked in the best light. But I do think that there is definitely some drawing power there in bringing back like older stars. I mean, Rey Mysterio has come back. MVP has come back. I mean, MVP has now aligned himself with Bobby Lashley, and it's proven like they can be beneficial and make it work. I mean, it's proved MVP with Bobby Lashley. Rey Mysterio is still a draw and still like one of the crowd's favorite. I feel like if it's done right, it can be very beneficial for the newer talent that they're putting over per se, but also sometimes you don't need to put over a new talent and their star is not dimmed or dulled. They still are very vibrant and can contribute a lot to the community. So I think it's beneficial if it's booked the right way.
Sure. A very pragmatic answer. I like that. Next one, going back to the questions, is someone asks me, "What's wrestling? Like, what do you show them?"
Oh, it would have to be some Shawn Michaels match. Just because I feel like he intertwines and like embodies like great at selling, like great at in-ring work, like character work. I don't know what Shawn match it would be, but it would have to be something Shawn Michaels.
Yeah, sure. Fair enough. That makes sense. Yeah, I think that's a good intro to wrestling for anyone anyway.
Yeah.
The next one is the best match I've ever seen. That can be live or televised, whichever you prefer.
I feel like, I mean, we're talking indie wrestling. One of them, I don't know. It's definitely like up there for best matches, but I think also because it's one of my favorite matches is Mercedes Martinez and Kylie Rae in a no ropes submission match at Rise.
Right.
You can watch that on YouTube. That one and like the storytelling between Kylie Rae, the underdog, the crowd favorite, and the like vicious Mercedes Martinez. And it's so unique too because there's literally no ropes, and it was something I had never seen before. It's very unique in its stipulation too, and all of that. So that for me is definitely one. But I mean, you can't go wrong with the classic Sasha Banks and Bayley and NXT Takeover Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Where a lot of people like got onto wrestling because of that. Like Indy Hartwell is a perfect example. She started wrestling because she saw that match and a light bulb went off in her head. Yeah. So that for me too is definitely like up there for best matches.
And people say it a lot, but it's true. But like that is the match that, especially I'd say for like the hardcore WWE audience, was like oh, we need to get like women doing more of this on the show
Mhm.
rather than what they're doing.
Yeah,
Like, and that's a perfect example of like how one match can sort of just turn the tide of everything, which is great.
definitely. Yeah, it turned the tide for a lot of people. I've spoken with a couple people who have said that match is like
Mm.
their like really first introduction to wrestling.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Great choices, great choices. The next one would be my dream match, like to watch. If you could pick anyone, let's say like indie or otherwise, wrestling or not, like still wrestling or not.
It's been one that I've been very vocal about, and I'm still mad it didn't happen, like, at the Royal Rumble, is Mickie James and Charlotte Flair.
Mm,
It was literally right in front of them, and they did nothing to capitalize on it, and now I've been robbed of that match twice. So I will always advocate for hardcore Mickie James versus the Queen Charlotte Flair.
yeah, that would be a great match. Yeah, absolutely. The next one is, and this is just a live one. This isn't going to go with like TV stuff, but this is like the loudest pop I've ever heard.
Like, in person?
Yeah.
I don't know. I honestly, like, oh, man. I don't know, maybe just for me, like, because I was a huge fan of him and maybe I was wrong, but, in 2016, I almost said 2006, oh my god. In 2016, I was at the first SmackDown after the draft, like,
Right.
when that, like, six-pack challenge happened to name the number 1 contender for the WWE Championship against Dean Ambrose, and Dolph Ziggler won that, and I made a Dolph Ziggler sign, so maybe it was me, like, popping myself, but I feel like everybody was such in, like, big shock. And I mean, at that point, he was a huge baby face too, as well. And so for me, that was definitely like a pop. Like I remember feeling in my body. I think everybody was just in shock because I mean, you had like John Cena in that match with like Bray Wyatt, AJ Styles, and like some other people. I feel like not a lot of people were expecting him to win, including myself. Even though I brought a Dolph Ziggler sign as a fan to that match. And then he won the thing. So that for me, I feel like maybe because personally I popped myself, but I just remember everybody was in shock and like cheering for him because he was huge. And then Dean Ambrose came out and they had this stare down.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I think that happens though, doesn't it? Like sometimes you pop yourself so much, you're like, oh, this is mental.
Yeah.
But like again, like that's a weird thing. Like you just mentioned, like time-wise, it's crazy to think that was like 6 years ago. Like when Dolph was getting that mega push from like Survivor Series up to like with the Miz, and then like that title shot with Dean is like.
Yeah, that was a good stretch of time.
That was a great run for him. That really was. And this is a tough one because I'm going to put you on the spot again. But it's wrestling's greatest moment.
Why did the first thing that came to mind was John Cena's debut against Kurt Angle?
I mean, that's great for certain things. I admit.
I mean, it was really the start of like a storied career in WWE as like kind of you strayed away from the era of The Rock and Stone Cold and into this new ruthless aggression era. So yeah, I'm gonna say the on-screen debut of John Cena.
Nice. That's an out there choice, but I like it. Well, Ella, it's been great to have you on. I'm gonna just end with one final thing, just because I've sort of thought of it while we've been chatting, is the fact that you mentioned Eve and that fandom there and how that's all started. And they've got their She Won coming up in June, which is great. They've already announced Venny for it, which is huge. I'm really excited for that. So my question would be to you, because obviously they've not announced any more names at the time we're recording, and we're not trying to give anything away because we don't know anything, but who would you want to see? If we could say, if they were going to bring over like 2 or 3 like US stars or even like British stars, like who would you want to see in it? Who would you want to see in it? And who would you want to see win it?
I'm trying to think of people who aren't signed right now. But there's also, I mean, there's people that are signed that still work like independent stuff. So I don't know. I want to see Mercedes Martinez back in Pro Wrestling EU. I would love that. Who else do I think would like fit really well? US wise. Hyan's already come over. I'm just thinking like Texas right now. Like, I don't know why.
That entire scene.
You know what? I'm gonna say Lainey Luck. The Party Unicorn. She's residing in Chicago right now, and she does a lot of work there. But she also does a lot of work in Texas. I don't know why she's like the first person that came to mind, but I feel like Lainey Luck could vibe really well with a lot of like. I would love like I don't know why. I just want to like see her in Jeddah. I think that would be like so interesting. I mean, I know Jeddah's champ right now, but just like theoretically,
yeah.
but also UK stars. They've been bringing in a lot of like newer talent, which makes me newer to Eve, I would say, like Lizzie Evo, Alexis Falcon. We've seen like Amira Blair.
Yeah.
We just brought in Ivy. I saw that.
Yeah.
That made me happy.
Ivy's fantastic.
There's a lot. I would love to see my girl Emily Hayden get a shot at that. I feel like, I mean, she's big in Scotland and all of that, but I feel like I don't think she's crossed paths with Pro Wrestling Eve.
No,
so
I
would love to see her too. Definitely.
Nice. Some great choices there. Some great choices. Well, again, I've said it a couple of times, but Ella, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been great having you on. Thank you for anyone who's been listening this long as well. It's been fascinating to get to know about you and your story and your love of wrestling, and also talk about women's wrestling at the end of Women's History Month. We always end each podcast with giving our guest a little bit of promo time. So it'd be it would be unwise of us to not do the same for you. So for anyone who is like only just learning about you now, which I couldn't believe, but like, you know, if it's the case, then how can people find you? Where can people check you out?
To make things easiest, if you follow me on Twitter, I guess, or you could say Instagram. On Twitter, it's Ella J, or if you go on Twitter or Instagram @WrestlingGal. If you go to my bio, there's a link tree to all my links to all my merch, all the shows I do on like Women's Wrestling Talk, SE Scoops. I write for WrestleZone. I host a bunch of different podcasts and platforms as well. But the easiest way is to go to the link tree in my bio for all those fun stuff.
Amazing. There we go. Go check Ella out. Check out her stuff. It's fantastic. You'll love it. Just like we do here at Grapple Theory. Go check it out. Ella, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been amazing. It's been a lot of fun.